See, forgot. So again, Perek Kafal of Pasuk Yudchet. We had just finished learning about the death of Menashe. We talked about the fact that at least from what we can see in Sefer Melachim, he was a horrifically bad individual, did terrible things, wasn't zochet to be buried in the burial ground of kings. He was buried in what was called Gan Uza. We looked last week at the archaeological potential of where that might be, some different opinions. And obviously we can't come to a conclusion exactly, but it's somewhere in the general vicinity of in the old city, near the old city, south of the old city. So it's somewhere around there. And what we left with last week was we needed to talk about whether or not Menashe did tshuva, because there seems to be a contradiction in Masachet Sanhedrin. In the first Mishnah in Perek Yud, it says that all Jews have a portion in the world to come, except for certain individuals. And it lists 3 kings. Among them is Menashe. So it would seem that he didn't do tshuva. And yet the Gemara seems to indicate he did do tshuva. So first what we're going to do is we're going to look at a few psukim in Divrei Hayamim Bet Perek Lamed Gimel. I'll put that on the screen in a minute. We're going to see just a few psukim that are not included here in Sefer Melachim. And then I'm going to show you, we're going to go through a document I have. I didn't write it. I came across it in my search for what was considered proper, what Menashe did. Was it proper tshuva, not proper tshuva? And then we'll hopefully we'll finish this parak and maybe continue the next one, but highly unlikely this evening, unfortunately. So let's go to the psukim in Melachim Bet. Sorry, in Divrei Yamim Bet, starting in Pasuk Perek Lamed Gimel, starting Pasuk Yud Bet. Right before this, we have a series of similar psukim that we saw here in Melachim of the bad things that Menashe did, and the fact that he gets this bad news that the end is near. So let's read from Yud Bet. Uchehatzer lo, when things are getting bad for him, chilat b'nei Hashem Elokav, he davened, prayed to God. Vayikana me'od, he became extremely subjugated himself to the will of God. Milifnei Elokei avotav. What did he do? Vayitpalel elav, he davened to Hashem. Vaye'ater lo, and Hashem listened to his tefillah for 50 points and a chance to go to the bonus round. Where to the first place we see this expression Vaye'ater lo? Not in Navi. Say again.
Yitzchak and Rivka.
Excellent. Very, very good. Yitzchak and Rivka, they both davened Hashem. It says Vaye'ater lo, he listened to, he accepted the tefillah of Yitzchak. So he accepted the tefillah, Vayishmat techinato, and he heard his begging, his tefillah, Vayeshivehu Yerushalayim lemalchuto, and he enabled him to go back to Yerushalayim, to his kingdom, to his kingship. Vayeda Menashe ki Hashem hu Elokim, and Menashe finally realized, Hashem is Hashem. Hashem is God. As a result of that, what did he do? David Marava legichon benachal velavo b'shara dagim v'savav laofer vayagbiheha meod vayasam sarichaya l'chol harim b'tzorot Yehuda. As a list of, I'm not going to go into detail, a list of various projects he saw come into being, which were to build up the city. Vayasar et Elohei hanechar, he removed the foreign gods. V'etasemel Hashem, and also we talked about this, the Asherah tree he'd put like this in the Beit HaMikdash. And all the mizbachot that were built on Har HaBayit, and he tossed them all out of the city. Vayiven et mizbach Hashem, vayizbach alav, v'zivche shlamim v'todah, vayom el Yehuda la'avod et Hashem Elokei. So he not only builds the mizbech to God and properly brings korbanot, but he also then instructed people to serve Hashem. Of course, so they still continue to use bamot. Okay, they were doing it for God, but they still were using bamot. So if you read these psukim, it sounds like he made it actually, it's not a 360, it's a 180. When a person does the 360, they go back to where they started. I don't know if you realize that. He he made a complete 360. Great, he came back to the starting point. So it would appear that he did proper tshuva. So now let's take a look at this document.
Another question.
Sure, go ahead.
Why isn't this in Malachim?
Why is what?
Why is that not in Malachim? All that.
Oh, very good question. We're going to get to that. We're going to get to that. If we get to it tonight, I'll show you, because it's addressed by the Dat Sofrim. We may get to it still.
Another thing, you seem to just take for granted that he did shuvah. That's it. He did shuvah, but there doesn't seem to be a real examining of the heart. It doesn't. It just says all of a sudden, boom, he started to daven. Maybe he thought that it was time for him to go, and
right.
He better make a 180 before his time or whatever.
Right.
There seems to be any introspection, any.
Okay. Very good. Very good. Okay, so I'll argue both sides of the coin. On the one hand, I agree 100%. It doesn't seem like it doesn't say that he started, doing tshuva and he tore his clothing and he bowed down before God. No, it says he realized God is God and he told him, here's what we're going to do and here's the process. More almost sounds like mechanical. On the other hand, it does say that Hashem saw his tefillah, he listened to this. It says vayikana, he subjugated himself to God. So the whole point is that it is somewhat ambiguous if we look at the text. So let's take a look now at this. And if I remember right, this came from Herzog, Machon Herzog. Let's see, that's what it's called, right? Machon Herzog. My mind's blank. Hashem shalachet hanavim lahatrot b'Menashe. We talked about this already in Sefer Melachim, that Hashem sent Nevi'im to give warnings to Menashe. Hem ishtamshu b'tiurim kashim. They use some very difficult descriptions. Ach Menashe lo shama b'kolam, but Menashe didn't listen. Hashem shalach alav et tzva Ashur. Hashem sent the army of Assyria against them. Shalakadet Menashe b'shal shalaot barzel v'hevi'uhu leBavel. That took Menashe in chains, in iron chains, to Bavel. Sham, there, ichnisu ledud nechoshet she'esh museket mitachtav. Now, this does not appear in Sefer Melachim, and it doesn't appear in Sefer Divrei Yamim either, but hang in there. So they placed him basically into a pot, which there was a fire underneath. Kol muvabes in the second Sanhedrin. Where is its source for this? It's a Gemara in Sanhedrin. It says as follows: Dud shel nechoshet. When I first read this, I said David shel nechoshet. That didn't make any sense. Dud shel nechoshet asulo. They made for him an iron pot, v'natnu oto betocho, and they put him in it. Ayu mesikim tachtav. What's that? Copper. Thank you.
Copper.
Thank you. And they lit a fire under it. When he said, I'll kind of freely translate, when he realized, like, I'm literally in hot water here. He didn't leave behind a single avodah zarah that he didn't mention. What does that mean? He didn't cry out to God. He's mentioning this avodah zarah and this avodah zarah. May Neptune help me. May this one help me. When he saw nothing was helping, Amar, he said, I remember that my father read to me and said, Pasuk in Dvarim, that Hashem will never forsake you, never destroy you, never leave you. I will read the same pasuk. If he answers, good. And if not, then all the gods are equal. The same thing means he's not answering me, and this God's not answering me. It's a very strange Gemara. It says that the angels closed all the windows to heaven. That the tefillot of Menashe should not reach Hashem's kisei hakavod. And the ministering angels said, Adam shamid tzelem beheichal, a man who placed, let's just say it's not a cross because there wasn't a concept yet, but let's say cross. But put a zara in the Heichal, in the Beit HaMikdash. You're going to be able to accept this tshuva. Amar lahem, Hashem said to them, to the angels, Im eini mekablo tshuva. If I don't accept his tshuva, hare ani noel delet lifnei kol baalei tshuva. I will basically and essentially be closing the door on all baalei tshuva. Chata lona chatira mitachat kisei hakavod v'kiblu v'yashivuhu Yerushalayim lemalchuto. Says that he burrowed a hole by the kisei hakavod and he accepted his tefillah. Now again, this is a little bit esoteric. What do you mean they closed the windows of tefillah? Was Hashem not here? Like Hashem says, I don't hear you. Of course not. What does it mean? Not for tonight. But the point was here and he accepted the tshuva, and he returned him to Yerushalayim, to his kingdom. B'meh heshivu, with what did he return him? Ruach hashivo. Returned him with wind or spirit. At that moment, Menashe declared there is a judge and there is a judgment, or there's a judgment and a judge. So, from this Gemara, do you think, before we go on, did he or did he not do tshuva? What do you think, just based on the Gemara?
He did not.
He did not.
He did not.
Okay. So we're going to see that there are differences of opinion in reading this Gemara.
Because he said he did all the Avodah Zorah, and then he said, we're going to try Hashem.
Right.
If it works, great. If it doesn't work, great. It's like another Avodah Zorah. It's not. He doesn't say it's Emet.
Okay. So I'm going to give it. Okay. So before we read on, I don't even think what I'm about to tell you is mentioning. Let me just take a quick look. It's not. Okay. And if I were writing this paper, I think I would add the following. There's a similar story by a man whom I have commented at least 2 or 3 times over the years, because it's such a famous narrative in the Gemara that it's mentioned dozens of times over the years in different people's speeches. And it's the story of Elazar ben Durdia. Have any of you ever heard of this man, Rabbi Elazar ben Durdia? Okay. So let me tell you who he was. It says in the Gemara that he was such a bad individual. He was Jewish, but he was such a bad individual that there wasn't an avodah zarah in the world he didn't bow down to. There wasn't a zonah, a prostitute he didn't sleep with, and it has a whole list of things. And one day he's walking and hears a bat kol. He hears a heavenly voice. Everyone has a place in the world to come except Elazar ben Durdia. Okay, well, that's a bit of a wake-up call. What does he do? He goes to the mountains and he says, Bakshu ala rachamim, go to God and please ask him to have mercy on me. And the mountains responded by saying, before we ask for you, we have to ask for ourselves. So he went to the heavens, and to the stars, and to the sun, and to the moon. And the Gemara lists a whole bunch of things he goes to. He says, Bakshu ala rachamim, go to God and ask him for mercy for me. And every one of them said, before we ask for you, we have to ask for ourselves. It says that he put his hands on his lap, put his face or his head in his hands, and he started to cry and said, En hadavar talui elabi. The thing, meaning the concept of tshuva, is only relying on me. It means I have to do it. It said that at that moment, his neshama went out of him, and the Gemara says that he went straight to Gan Eden, and then it says, Yesh shekoneh olamo b'sha'a achat, that a person can acquire his olam haba in a single moment, in 1 hour. He went in a complete transformation. Now, why am I mentioning this story? Because we see over there that it started off similarly to what happens over here. Even though over here he's crying out to the gods, lowercase g, for help, here this man is looking for other people to solve. He doesn't even think about going to God. Once he does realize that it's only depending on God, then the Gemara gives a clear statement that he went straight to Gan Eden and he was koneh olamo. There are similar parallels in the wording, which I'm not going to get into here either. But there's another thing, another parallel story, which I'm again surprised is not mentioned. If you look at the wording of the Gemara, I'm going to highlight a couple of words. He said as follows, according to the Gemara: Im oneh, if God answers, mutav, good. Vim lav, harei kol hapanim shavim, then all the faces are the same, which means that all the gods are the same. Does this expression remind you of anything? It's not related to avodah zarah. Matter of fact, just the opposite. Anything sound familiar there? And it's something you have had to pay attention to over the years to various speakers or things you might have read. So we are coming up to the Chag, Bezrat Hashem, in a few weeks, of Shavuot. The Gemara in Masechet Shabbat says, Kafa alehem har kegiyit. When Bnei Yisrael were standing betachtit har, at the foot of the mountains, how we were explain it. But according to one expression, the Gemara means that they literally were standing under the mountain. And Hashem said to them, Im tekablun mutav. If you accept my Torah, good. Ve'im lav, and if not, sham tehei kavuratchem. This is where you're going to be buried. Of course, the Gemara goes on, and Rava says, wait a minute. That means we accepted it under duress. So everyone can say, we didn't accept the Torah. So they say they'll kimu v'kiblu. In the time of Mordechai and Esther, we re-accepted the Torah on free will. But it's a similar phraseology of im onet mutav v'im lav harei kol. So it's a similar phraseology. Okay, fine. So now the question we go back to that I raised was, based on this Gemara, did he do tshuva or not? So let's take a look at the Gemara, what this paper tells us based on certain other locations, including Pirkei de Rabbi Elazar. Okay, move up at Pirkei de Rabbi Elazar. Rabbi Yoshua Omer, Teida lecha koach hatshuva. Rabbi Elazar tells us, know the power of tshuva. Bo ure'emi Menashe ben Chizkiyahu. Come and look at Menashe, the son of Chizkiyahu. Shasa kol to'avot ra'ot ba'olam. He did all the evil abominations in the world. V'hirba la'asot hara. He continued to do bad. V'zavach legilulim, and he brought korbanot. I should even say korbanot, sacrifices to Avodah Zarah. Shamar, I should say Shamar. V'hu ha'avir et banav ba'esh b'gai ben Hinnom. Hirba la'asot hara b'nei Hashem lahachiso. V'yatza liYerushalayim mafri shonim v'zovech l'chotzar shamayim u'ba'usarei gedudei. I'm just going to read this because he's quoting all the bad things he did. We know them. V'achazu oto b'mineket rosho v'horidu oto bavela. He this brings us to the middle of the story of Sanhedrin, that he was in this pot and he was calling out to all these different gods to whom he had already brought sacrifices. None of them responded and helped him. Avi. He said, I'm going to call to the God of my fathers, who, if he maybe he'll answer me like he did for my father. Now, what does he say here? This is Pirkei de Rabbi Elazar. This is Tana. This is the Pirkei Avot equivalent by Rabbi Elazar, who says, the Tana says, V'kara le'elokei avotav b'chol libo. He says that he called out to Hashem with his entire heart. Vayetarlo, and Hashem responded. He listened. Boto sha'a amar Menashe eat din ve'it dayan. There, eat is Aramaic for yesh. There is a judgment and there is a judge. Now, what about the whole issue of? So at this point, it sounds like he did tshuva. Not only did he do tshuva, Rabbi Eliezer brings this as a avtipus, how do you say that? Paradigm for doing tshuva. But what about this contradiction I mentioned before? The Masechet Sanhedrin Muva, it says in Sanhedrin, Shlosha melachim ein lahem chelek l'olam haba. Yerovam, that's Yerovam ben Nevat, Achav, and Menashe. Look, he's one of the guys that doesn't have a place in the world to come. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Menashe yesh lo chelek l'olam haba. But Rabbi Yehuda says he does have a place in the world to come. So which is it? Rabbi Yochanan hitbate al ha'omrim ki tshuvato lo hitkabla, ke merapim et yedehem shel balei tshuva. So according to Rabbi Yochanan, the reason Hashem accepted the tshuva of Menashe was so that the people, other people who were trying to do tshuva, would not feel dejected and still try to do tshuva. Meaning, it would appear, in spite of what Rabbi Eliezer says in Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer, that his tshuva was not so full. Because at least according to, who was it? Rabbi Yochanan, right? According to Rabbi Yochanan, the reason Hashem accepted him, which Hashem says to Kiviyachol, as it were, to the Malachim, right? Is that was the reason he accepted his tshuva. If we truly believe that nothing stands in the way of tshuva, we have to actually see a situation where that is true. In other words, it's very nice to say, "Ein davar she'omed bifnei tshuva." Very nice statement. How do we know that? Oh, we look at Menashe. Here's a guy that there's no one we can imagine, a Jew nowadays doing, no matter how bad they might be, how far off the derech, and how far off the rails they might be, doing what he did, and yet his tshuva is accepted. Mashma that no matter how bad a person I might be, there's still room for tshuva. Let's see what the Zohar says. Azara Parshat Bereshit. Ubefetach ha'echal omed Menashe melech Yudah, she'asa tshuva shlema l'chata'av. At the doorway to the entrance to the Beit HaMikdash stood Menashe, king of Judah, who did complete tshuva for his sins. HaKadosh Baruch Hu kibel tshuvato, and Hashem accepted his tshuva. As we've seen in the Gemara, that he also, in the Midrash rather, no, it was the Gemara, I forgot already, that Hashem dug this place for him under his Kisei HaKavod. Furthermore, it's brought in Zohar. Rabbi Shimon Omer, En lacha davar shebe'olam shomed b'fnei tshuva klal. Again, a statement, nothing stands in the way of tshuva. Midrash Rabbah. I'm going to skip that one. Go to Maharal, because it's similar. Maharal says, Melamed shasa kadosh baruch hu kamin machteret berakia. Hashem made for the Keilu, Hashem made for Menashe like an underground tunnel in the heavens. Perush, meaning, Kishar balei tshuva potech HaKadosh Baruch Hu petach b'tshuva u'mekabel otam bedin. Hashem, so to speak, throws open the doors to the ones who want to do tshuva and accepts them. Aval Menashe kibel HaKadosh Baruch Hu oto shelo mitzad hadin. The acceptance of the tshuva of Menashe wasn't necessarily based completely on the strict letter of the law. Just really on chesed. So, what is it? Let's look at the last paragraph. From all this, it turns out, klal gadol in Judaism, no matter how bad a person may be in their life, no matter what they have done, even, God forbid, murder. Now, does that mean a person can just say a few things and he's Hashem accepts the tshuva? No. Obviously, there's a lot of other stuff which involves the person's death, something that's called chibut hakever, which I'm not going to get into now because it's really wild stuff, and going through Gehinnom and going through hell, literally. But that's part of the purification process. Understand one thing in parentheses, and definitely out of the purview of tonight. The purpose of Gehinnom is not to punish. I shouldn't say completely like that. It's not its main goal. It's to purify the neshama, to purify the person to be able to go to Gan Eden. That's the general concept. Even though we looked at it as punishment. Why? Because also you're not getting that time in Gan Eden. Okay, anyway, so there's nothing that stands before tshuva. Even in front of Menashe, who was so evil in his ways, what does that mean? Listen to what the point was being made here earlier by the Maharal and now in summation. Imagine the following scenario. I wronged somebody and you wronged somebody, and we both go to apologize. And we're both standing outside the house. We're begging for forgiveness. The person in the house can hear us. For you, the man opens the front door, puts his arm around you. I forgive you. Come on, sit down. Let's have some coffee. For me, he said, go around the back, sneak in through the window, and just wait for me back there. I forgive you. Which one sounds like it's a more accepted tshuva? Obviously, the first one. It's out of love. It's done properly. So the idea appears to be that his tshuva was tshuva. Was it complete? Apparently not complete enough. And his tshuva was accepted for rachamim, and not just rachamim on him, but on us. הבה ננצל אף אנו את ידו האוהבת והפשוטה של הבורא עולם, שקורא לעברנו באהבה שובו בנים שובבים ארפה משובותיכם, אוהבם נדבה. This ends with a little musar here, like we should take advantage of this idea that Hashem always is there to take our tshuva. I want to mention one thing before we continue. In Nusach Ashkenaz, you know that in Tachanun, in Monday and Thursday, it says, Hapotech yad b'tshuva. Hashem is the one who opens his hand for tshuva. What does that mean? Hashem says, look, you want to do tshuva? Come on, I'm here. Take my hand. When you get to Ne'ilah, at the end of Yom Kippur, it says, Hanoten yad l'tshuva. Hashem is the one who gives his hand to tshuva. That we can spend 364 days, it's actually not that, it's 354, but okay, 364 days, Slach lanu avinu ki chatanu. We could say Hashem kavachum mechanun, Hashem nu bagadnu, al chet, and everything. And during those entire times and all those days of the year, Hashem is apoteach yad b'tshuva. He's putting his hand there for us. But on the day that it counts the most, the Yom HaKadosh, the Shabbat Shabbaton, Yom Kippur, at the very, very, very end of Yom Kippur, the persona, in quotes, of Hashem changes. And it becomes where Hashem reaches out to us and say, I see you've tried to do everything you can. I'm going to reach out to you now, and I'm going to take you to me, and I'm going to accept your tshuva. That's the difference between the entire year of HaPoteach Yad, Hashem opens his hand, to Hanoten Yad, where he gives his hand to take us back with tshuva. Nothing but nothing stops tshuva, even if it's not perfect, because I don't believe there's anything as perfect tshuva. We will see that eventually in another place. And the reason I wanted to spend this much time on it is because Menashe, we castigated, Yirmiyahu did in Sefer Melachim. Here we see some horrific things he did, and yet we also see the opinion in the Mishnah that he has a place in the world to come, even though others say he doesn't have. And was it tshuva, was it not tshuva? So there isn't a definitive answer, in spite of the fact that there are the opinions that say he absolutely did perfect tshuva. There are other opinions that it was not perfect tshuva, but because Hashem needed to show you and me and everybody else that there's nothing that stands in front of tshuva, that's why it's there. And that's why we spent some time on this tonight. Okay. Now, yeah.
Can we make any conclusion about why it is?
It's hard to hear you. Try again.
Can we come to any conclusion about why it is that Yirmiyahu didn't choose to include Menashe's tshuva?
Right.
Such an important
Right. So let me just take a look at something if we're going to get to that now or not. Just a minute, because I have another thing on that. Hold on. No, I have it because it's its own discussion. That's going to be for next week. Let me see where that is. Yeah, that's going to be, probably be next week. Bezrat Hashem. Okay. Matter of fact, it will be. Okay. What I want to do now is read a few psukim, which we've read before a few weeks ago. I want to read them again, starting now with Pasuk Yud Tet. Back to the text. Yud Tet. And we're going to finish off this parak. It's only a few psukim. And begin the next chapter. And for those of you who didn't see the message before we started, I for various reasons, I'm going to need to stop it in 10 minutes. I'm going to daven Marv here instead of later on. Okay. Pasuk Yud Tet, number 19. Now, remember, Menashe is now dead. Ben 22 shana Amon b'molcho. Let's go back to Pasuk Yud Chet, where he dies. Vayishkav Menashe im avotav. Menashe lay with his fathers. Again, its expression means he died. Vayikaver began beito began Uzzah. And he was buried in the garden of his house called Gan Uzzah. Once again, we discussed that at length last week. Vayimloch Amon beno tachtav. And Amon, his son, became king in place of his place. Now, Pasuk Yud Tet, number 19. Ben 22 shana Amon b'molcho. When Amon became king, he was 22 years old. Ushtaim shanim malach b'Yerushalayim. And he ruled for 2 years in Yerushalayim. V'shem imo Meshulemet bat Charutz min Yotva. And his mother's name was Meshulemet, etc., etc. There's one thing that's really important to point out. That with all of his faults, with Menashe, with all of the Avodah Zarah, with all the bringing things into Beit HaMikdash and everything else, he still married Jewish. He still had a Jewish wife, gave birth to a Jewish son, and therefore continued the Shalshelet, the chain from David HaMelech. Because remember, all the kings in Yehuda are descendants of David HaMelech, as will Be'ezrat Hashem Melech HaMashiach be Mashiach ben David. Vayas, number Pasuk Kaf. Vayas hara b'nei Hashem. He did evil in the eyes of Hashem. Kasher asa Menashe aviv, like his father Menashe did. Vayelech b'chol haderech asher lach aviv. He went in the way, all the ways of his father. Vayavod et hagilulim asher avad aviv. He also served the avodah zarah that his father did. Vayishtachu lahem, and he bowed down to them. Vayazov et Hashem Elokei avotav. He forsook, I think is the right way, Hashem, the God of his fathers, and he didn't go in the way of God, in the way of Hashem. Now, Notice something. Look at the words. Vayazov et Hashem Elokei avotav v'lo halach b'derech Hashem. Is that not redundant? Of course it's redundant. Just say either Vayazov et Hashem Elokei avotav, he forsook Hashem, the God of his fathers, or say v'lo halach b'derech Hashem. He didn't go in the way of God. It's basically the same thing. Correct? So if we take a look once again. Yes.
No,
Why?
he has what his home bringing does, and then what he can do himself.
Say what you mean a little bit clearer. I think I know what you're saying, but say it clearer, please.
There is the chinuch you get at home, and then you can choose your own derech once you're an adult. So he didn't go with the chinuch that he got at home, and then he chose the wrong derech as an adult.
Okay, but as far as I can recall, and I could be wrong, there was no other king that had said the two things like this. When they came, there were other kings that were good people. There were other kings that were followed Hashem, and their child came after them and didn't follow, and there were things that were bad and they didn't follow Hashem, but didn't use this double lashon, as far as I can remember. Now, if they kept saying that, I would agree with you, but here's something different, I believe. Now, I'm basing this on my own opinion right now, and what I'm about to show you. I could be wrong, because I didn't look for this somewhere. So take a look at this again. Whoops. We looked at, not this, sorry. That's not what I want. We looked at, here. Divrei Yamim. What is it that he did? Forget the Gemara, forget all that. What is it that Menashe did? Let's move up a little bit. Move you all over a little. Okay. It says in Pasuk Yud Bet, Uchahatzerlo, when things were very bad for him, he was constricted by all the bad things happening. Chilat Penei Hashem Elokav, Vayikana Meod Milifnei Elohei Avotav. It mentions here and later. It mentions the relationship that Menashe reestablished, I guess in quotes, with Elokei Avotav. So when it tells us over here in Sefer Melachim, V'lo halach Vayazov et Hashem Elokei Avotav, I think that it is Yirmiyahu's implication here to this reference, meaning that whereas his father did tshuva at least to some degree and returned to God, he didn't follow in his footsteps. And in addition to that, he also went beyond that to what happened beforehand and went back to where it reverted back to what his father had done and his forefathers had done. I don't totally negate what you were saying, Aryeh, but I think that maybe we're both right. I don't know. Maybe. I'm not sure. Okay, let's take a look now. Let's continue. Pasuk Kaf Gimel. Vaikshiru abdei Amon alav. The servants of Ammon, his inner circle, made a plot. Vayamitu et hamelech beveito, and they killed the king in his home. I want to see one thing. Right. Okay. Kaf Daled. Vayach ha'ma'aretz et kol haksharim ala melech Ammon, and those people who plotted to kill the king and did do so, were then themselves struck, could be killed. Vayamlichu amaretz et Yoshiyahu beno tachtav. And now Yoshiyahu, who is the son of Ammon, the grandson of Menashe, the great-grandson of Chizkiyahu, has now become the king. And we'll see in a moment that he was not very old. V'yeter divrei Ammon asher asa, Elohim ktuvim al Sefer Divrei Hayamin l'Malchei Yehuda. What he did, the rest of what Ammon did, was written in the book of Chronicles of the Kings of Judah. He also, like his father, was buried in Gan Uzzah, not with all the other kings of Israel. And his son Yoshiyahu took over in his place. I'm going to read just one more pasuk. Ben shmoneh shana Yoshiyahu b'molcho. Yoshiyahu was all of 8 years old when he became king. Ushloshim v'achat shana malach b'Yerushalayim, and he ruled for 31 years. V'shem imo Yedida bat Adaya mi Skat. I think that's how it's pronounced. So here we have a situation where you had a horrifically bad king who seems to have done some form of tshuva. A son that comes along and doesn't do the right thing. He gets knocked off. The people that knocked him off, they get trampled, they get struck, and they take the son of Ammon, make him the king. This is Yoshiao, and he's all of 8 years old. How is that going to impact? Yoshiao, we were going to see, starts off as a parv king, or maybe not so great, becomes very good, and there's this almost last few gasps among the last couple of kings of Malchut Yehuda. Bezrat Hashem, next week we're going to start again at the beginning here of Perek Kaf Bet, get into the depth of why Yirmiyahu and Ezra have different stories between Divrei Yamim and Melachim about whether or not Menashe did Shuvah. We have to address that. And then we have to learn about Yoshiyahu and the story of a Sefer Torah that was found. Why is that unusual? Because believe it or not, there are no Sefer Torah around for almost generations by this point. It's hard for us to imagine that, but that's what's coming up, Bezrat Hashem. Tov, have a Shavua Tov. We'll have a full Bezrat Hashem next week, a full class, both in terms of people. Very, very nice to see everybody, and also in terms of time. In the meantime, have a wonderful evening.
You too.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.